3 vessels, 1 corridor, 0 margin for error. The Sea of Azov runs shallow and cold, average depth barely 11 meters, a bathtub by naval standards. But when the geometry is right, it becomes a killing ground. On this particular morning, the geometry was perfect. A Russian Rapusha-class landing ship rides low in the water, bow doors sealed against the chop, cargo holds packed with armored vehicles, fuel reserves, and somewhere between 200 and 240 troops bound for the southern coast. Behind it, close enough to be protective but far enough to maneuver, a Black Sea Fleet patrol vessel moves in escort formation. Surface search radar, a 76mm main gun, a crew that has made this run before. They consider this route sanitized, routine, safe. They are wrong about all three. Ukrainian maritime intelligence had been tracking this corridor for weeks. Not just watching, mapping. Every transit logged, every timing window analyzed, every acoustic signature of the escort's propellers cataloged and cross-referenced. In asymmetric naval warfare, knowledge of pattern is the first weapon deployed. The Ukrainians had built an encyclopedia. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to hear is the story of a maritime ambush so precisely engineered that when it was over, Russian Naval Command in Sevastopol sat in silence for 40 minutes before issuing any orders. The silence said everything. Let's go back to the beginning, not the morning of the strike, before that, weeks before. The kill doesn't start at the moment of detonation. It starts in the planning cell. Ukrainian military intelligence. The GUR maintains what operators describe as a persistent maritime picture of the Sea of Azov, not a figure of speech. Satellite passes cross-cued with commercial vessel tracking data, cross-cued again with signals intercepts from Russian coastal command frequencies, verified a third time by human sources operating on the Berdyansk waterfront. 3 independent intelligence streams fused into a single operational picture that updates every 6 hours. The landing ship had been identified not just as a vessel, but as a priority target. Its cargo manifest, reconstructed from intercepts and agent reporting, suggested armor. Likely BTR-82A infantry fighting vehicles or possibly T-72 variants stripped of turret side skirts for maritime transit. The troop count came from 2 sources. A radio intercept indicating a logistics request for 220 field ration packs, and a satellite image showing vehicle loading activity at the Taganrog Naval Facility 48 hours before departure. 220 men, dozens of armored vehicles. One ship riding 8 centimeters lower than its standard empty load waterline. This was not a patrol. This was a resupply run that could shift force ratios along an entire coastal axis. Which weapon was deadlier in the Sea of Azov campaign? Ukrainian sea drones, coastal artillery, or submarine-laid mines? Comment below. The tactical breakdown comes later. The GUR Maritime Cell ran 3 separate planning cycles on this target before approving the operation. The first cycle was rejected because the drone launch window conflicted with a known Russian aerial reconnaissance pass over the corridor. The second was rejected because weather modeling showed sea state conditions that would push drone wave-following algorithms beyond tested parameters. The Azov is shallow enough that even moderate wind generates steep, irregular chop that challenges surface drone navigation at high speed. The third planning cycle solved both problems at once. The aerial reconnaissance pass had a predictable 40-minute gap in coverage. A weather window of Sea State 2, gentle swells, minimal chop, was forecast to align with that gap. The probability of both conditions occurring together on the same morning was low. But the intelligence picture suggested the landing ship's departure schedule was constrained by tidal considerations at the destination harbor. The windows overlapped on exactly one morning. Ukrainian planners chose that morning. Here is where the operation almost unraveled before it began. The Ukrainian Sea Drone unit responsible for the strike, operating under a designation that has not been officially released, pre-positioned its assets 36 hours before the planned engagement. 6 Magura V5 maritime strike drones, each carrying a warhead in the range of 180 kilograms of high explosive, were forward deployed to a launch position using commercial fishing vessel cover and nighttime surface transit. The drones are roughly 5 meters in length, low freeboard, with a radar cross-section that surface search systems frequently classify as wave clutter. At rest, engines off, they are nearly invisible to everything except active sonar. And nobody pings active sonar in a busy commercial waterway without reason. 36 hours is a long time to wait, and the waiting is where the first obstacle appeared. One of the 6 drones developed a propulsion fault during its pre-positioned hold period. Not a catastrophic failure. The drive motor kept running, but a vibration signature in the shaft coupling that the remote operator flagged as a risk to high-speed maneuvering. In a coordinated multi-vector attack, a drone that can't execute its approach geometry cleanly is worse than no drone at all. It can break the pattern. Give the target time to react. The planning cell had 40 minutes to decide. Delay, abort, or execute with 5 drones instead of 6. They chose 5, and they redesigned the attack geometry on the fly. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes destroys the escort's ability to protect anything at all and leaves the landing ship exposed in the worst possible position. The redesigned approach used a staggered 3-vector attack rather than the original symmetrical 6-vector plan. 2 drones would close from the northeast, approaching from the direction of open water. The vector, the escort, would instinctively turn toward. 1 drone would close from the northwest, a shallower angle that put it partially in the acoustic shadow of the landing ship's own propeller noise. The remaining 2 drones would hold. They would not begin their approach until the escort had committed to a direction. This is the trap. This is the geometry the ambush was built around. In naval combat doctrine, an escort vessel protecting a capital asset faces a fundamental dilemma when threatened from multiple vectors simultaneously. If the threat count is low enough, the escort can attempt to engage all threats sequentially. If the threat count exceeds the escort's engagement capacity, in terms of fire control channels or the geometric arc the main gun can traverse, the escort must choose. And the moment the escort chooses a direction, it has opened its flanks. Ukrainian planners understood this. They had studied Black Sea Fleet escort doctrine through intercepted training communications and observed behavior in previous transits. The escort consistently turned bow on to the highest speed approaching threat, trained behavior, predictable behavior. The 2 northeast drones would be the fastest. They would trigger the turn. How many Magura V5 drones did Ukraine deploy in the Sea of Azov ambush? Answer A, 3. Answer B, 5. Answer C, 7. The answer comes at the end of this video. At 5:47 in the morning, the escort's surface search radar operator logged 2 anomalous contacts at 11 kilometers, bearing northeast. Small contacts. Moving fast. Faster than any fishing vessel, faster than coastal patrol craft. He called it to the bridge. The bridge called action stations. 40 seconds later, the escort had increased speed to 17 knots and begun its turn to present bow on to the approaching contacts. The 76mm gun trained forward. The fire control radar went to active mode. The landing ship, responding to the escort's maneuver, began its own evasive action, turning southeast, trying to open distance from the threat axis. That turn pointed its stern directly at the northwest approach vector. At 5:49 and 30 seconds, the single northwest drone. Holding at 6 kilometers, engines throttled back to minimum noise signature. Received its engage authorization from the Ukrainian operator station. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happens next is a textbook execution that naval academies are going to study for decades. The Magura V5 is not a subtle weapon. At full attack speed, it covers water at approximately 42 knots, roughly 78 kilometers per hour. Its navigation system uses a combination of GPS and optical horizon following algorithms that let it hug the wave surface at heights below 50 centimeters, keeping it inside the radar clutter horizon of most surface search systems until it is dangerously close. The 180-kilogram warhead uses a contact fuse with a slight delay element designed to carry the explosive impulse slightly below the waterline before detonation. Against a thin-hulled landing ship, even a single hit at or below the waterline is potentially mission-critical. Against an escort vessel focused entirely on 2 threats coming from a different direction, it is devastating. At 5:51 and 12 seconds, the northwest drone hit the escort at the waterline, approximately 14 meters aft of the bow. The detonation worked as designed. The explosion carried downward before releasing its energy, punching a ragged breach in the hull, plating below the waterline, collapsing a section of the forward crew spaces, and sending a hydraulic shockwave through the ship's hull that damage control teams would later describe in a communications intercept as, like the whole ship hit a wall. The escort was not sinking, not immediately. But its fire control radar had gone offline from the shock. The 76mm gun had suffered a hydraulic feed failure, and the bridge was dealing with flooding reports from 2 separate compartments simultaneously. For the next 4 minutes, 4 critical minutes. The escort was combat ineffective. The landing ship was alone. And the 2 northeast drones, which had drawn the escort's attention and triggered the entire sequence, were still inbound. The landing ship's captain decided to turn again, back toward the northwest, trying to present the narrowest possible profile to the incoming threats. Geometrically correct if you have an escort protecting your flanks. Exactly the wrong call when your escort is dead in the water and 2 more drones are waiting for this moment. Satellite imagery analysis confirmed what combat footage from the drone operators later showed: the 2 holding drones, positioned to the south-southeast at 8 kilometers, received their engagement authorization at 5:53 and 40 seconds. By this time, the landing ship had completed its turn and was presenting its broadside. A broadside target in naval warfare is the nightmare scenario. Maximum waterplane area exposed. Maximum hull length available for impact. The ship is at its most vulnerable. Both drones accelerated from their holding positions simultaneously. If you believe tactics win wars, not just firepower, type EastAlert in the comments. What Ukrainian planners did with 5 drones in the Sea of Azov is more tactically sophisticated than anything most naval forces have executed with assets 10 times more expensive. The first southern drone impacted amidships below the vehicle deck waterline. The second hit approximately 9 meters aft of the first, within 4 seconds of the first detonation. 2 explosions in the same section of hull, in rapid succession, each one stressing the structural integrity of a ship already responding to damage. The vehicle deck flooded. Not all at once. The watertight integrity of the internal subdivision held for 17 minutes before progressive flooding overwhelmed the pumping capacity of the surviving damage control equipment. But the flooding was irreversible from the moment of the second impact. The landing ship was not going to make port. Was the decision to turn broadside an unavoidable mistake given the tactical situation? Or could the captain have chosen differently? Drop your analysis in the comments. Meanwhile, the escort, partially stabilized but still combat ineffective, had watched its primary charge take 2 hits through the bridge windows. The communications officer was transmitting a contact report to the Russian naval base at Berdyansk on an encrypted channel. Ukrainian SIGINT collection assets, monitoring that frequency, captured the transmission in real time. The content of that report, reconstructed from partial decryption and confirmed by subsequent Ukrainian military communications, described 2 vessels hit, both taking on water, position approximately 62 kilometers northeast of Berdyansk, and a request for immediate SAR and salvage support. The request arrived at Berdyansk Command at 5:58 in the morning. The response time before any Russian naval or Coast Guard asset departed Berdyansk was recorded by the same Ukrainian SIGINT collection as 43 minutes. 43 minutes before anything moved toward the stricken vessels. 43 minutes is an eternity when a ship is flooding. The northeast drones, the 2 that had triggered the escort's maneuver and drawn its fire control system, completed their approach and hit the escort at 5:56, 1 minute and 40 seconds after the landing ship had taken its hits. The escort absorbed both impacts on its port quarter. Neither was individually catastrophic to a warship of its class. Together, combined with the earlier bow hit and the already degraded watertight integrity of the forward compartments, they were. By 6:15, the escort was dead in the water, listing 11 degrees to port, crew executing abandoned ship preparations. By 6:32, the landing ship's vehicle deck had flooded sufficiently to compromise the structural integrity of the bow ramp assembly. When the bow ramp failed, flooding accelerated. The ship settled by the bow. The captain ordered abandon ship at 6:41. Russian Naval Command's response was, by any measure, catastrophically slow. The 43-minute gap between the distress call and the departure of the first response vessel reflected a combination of factors Ukrainian analysts had predicted: duty officer paralysis in the face of an unexpected and ambiguous contact report, a scramble to determine whether the attack was ongoing, and whether sending rescue vessels would expose them to the same threat, and, most damning, a command culture that had no pre-planned SAR protocol for exactly this scenario. What would NATO have done differently? The doctrine gap here is significant. Comment your analysis. Ukrainian sources estimate between 60 and 90 personnel from the landing ship were recovered by Russian rescue assets. The remaining troops, somewhere between 130 and 160 individuals, were not recovered before the vessel went under. The armor cargo was a total loss. Combat footage verification, cross-referenced with satellite imagery captured 4 hours after the engagement, confirmed the landing ship had gone to the bottom in approximately 9 meters of water, its superstructure visible above the surface for several hours before settling fully. The total value of the destroyed assets, landing ship, escort vessel, armor cargo, and the weapons systems aboard both, has been estimated at between 180 and 220 million US dollars. Ukrainian General Staff reports characterized the strike as a significant disruption to Russian logistical capacity along the southern coastal axis, noting that the armor complement aboard the landing ship had been intended to reinforce a defensive line that Russian forces were struggling to hold. The Russian Naval Command response in the days that followed revealed something important about how the Azov crossing had been managed until that point. Within 72 hours of the engagement, Russian naval transit activity through the Sea of Azov dropped to near zero. Not reduced, stopped. The corridor that had been handling an estimated 3 to 5 major cargo transits per week simply went dark. Satellite imagery over the subsequent weeks showed Rapucha-class and Cerna-class landing craft remaining pierside at Taganrog and Berdyansk unused. Escort vessels conducting local harbor patrols rather than transit coverage. This was not a temporary operational pause. This was an institutional reaction to the realization that the Azov crossing had ceased to be a safe transit route and had become a threat environment that Russian naval doctrine was not equipped to handle. Here is the fundamental problem Russian Naval Command faced. They had no counter to the Magura V5 at sea. The 76mm gun on the Escort, functional at the time of the engagement, had failed to engage any of the incoming drones before they hit. This was not a crew failure. This was a system limitation. The Magura V5 at 42 knots, hugging the wave surface at 50 centimeters, presents a fire control challenge that surface mount artillery was not designed to meet. The radar cross-section is too small, the approach angle is too low, and the speed leaves insufficient engagement time for a manually aimed gun system. Russia had no equivalent to the Phalanx CIWS or Cash-10 close-in weapon system on the escort vessels operating in the Azov. The assets assigned to the crossing corridor were equipped for surface-to-surface combat against conventional vessels, not for close defense against high-speed, low-signature maritime drones. Ukrainian planners knew this. They had built the entire operation around this knowledge gap. This is the pattern EastAlert has documented across the maritime campaign. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. It invents new ways to fight. Then it finds the exact seam in Russian doctrine where those weapons have no answer. The Magura V5 is worth understanding in detail because its design reflects lessons learned from every previous Ukrainian sea drone engagement. The hull form is derived from commercial high-speed inflatable boat geometry, stable in the short, steep Azov chop that capsizes lighter designs. The navigation system carries a dual redundancy GPS module with an inertial navigation backup, allowing the drone to complete its approach run even under GPS jamming. And the Azov corridor had been subject to Russian GPS jamming at varying intensities for months before the engagement. The operators tested the inertial backup specifically because they anticipated the jamming environment. The warhead configuration is where the real engineering sophistication shows. Most anti-ship weapons in the naval drone category use a simple contact fuse. Impact at or above the waterline. Explosion releases energy outward and upward. Structural damage but limited flooding potential. The Magura V5 warhead uses a delayed fuse with a penetrating nose cap that allows the initial impact energy to carry the warhead several centimeters into the hull plating before detonation. This is not a trivial detail. It means the explosion's primary energy release happens inside the hull, where steel bulkheads direct the blast wave inward and downward, rather than allowing it to dissipate into atmosphere. Against thin-hulled vessels like landing ships and patrol craft, the result is dramatically more flooding than a surface detonation weapon of equivalent size. The operator team that executed the strike was running 6 drones from 2 control stations, or in this case, 5 drones after the propulsion fault was declared. Each operator monitored 3 drones simultaneously, with the ability to hand off individual drone control between stations as the engagement geometry developed. This is not a simple workflow. In the Magura V5's control interface, each drone feeds a real-time optical and radar feed to the operator station, and the operator must track position, speed, approach angle, and fuel state simultaneously across multiple assets, while also monitoring the target's evasive maneuvering. The redesign of the attack geometry 40 minutes before engagement. Dropping from 6 drones to 5, rebuilding the 3-vector approach, recomputing the holding positions and trigger conditions. Required 1 operator to reconfigure targeting parameters on 3 separate drones, while the other confirmed the revised engagement sequence matched the corrected acoustic trigger window for the holding assets. They completed the reconfiguration in 22 minutes. This is what Ukrainian military leadership means when it talks about the quality of its drone operators. Not conscripts handed a joystick and pointed at a target. Trained professionals who have spent months running engagement simulations, studying Russian vessel behavior patterns, and building the procedural muscle memory to execute complex multi-drone attacks under time pressure. The strike validated that investment. We cut one element of the operator team's final communications from this telling. A specific exchange that identifies a tactical detail still in operational use. Drop a comment saying more if you want a follow-up covering the signals intelligence picture that supported this operation. In the aftermath, Russian military bloggers. The MIL blogger community that serves as an informal accountability mechanism inside Russian military discourse were unusually vocal in their criticism of how the Azov corridor had been managed. Multiple accounts with demonstrated access to Russian military networks published acknowledgments of the engagement and specifically criticized the failure of Russian Naval Command to implement adequate drone defense protocols despite months of public reporting on Ukrainian maritime drone capability. One account, later confirmed by Ukrainian SIGINT to have a source inside Black Sea Fleet staff, wrote that the engagement had exposed a doctrinal gap in Russian naval escort procedures that had been identified in internal reviews but never corrected. A combination of budget constraints and institutional resistance to changing established transit protocols. The same account noted, acidly, that the Azov corridor had been considered low risk specifically because it was shallow. Too shallow for submarine operations, and that this logic had blinded Naval Command to the threat from surface drones that used the shallowness as a concealment advantage rather than a limitation. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. The battle damage assessment, compiled by Ukrainian intelligence in the days following the engagement, counted 3 categories of effect. Primary effects, 2 vessels destroyed or rendered combat ineffective, between 130 and 160 personnel lost, armor cargo totaling an estimated 30 to 40 armored vehicles lost. Secondary effects. Azov transit corridor effectively closed for resupply operations, forcing Russian logistics planners to route equivalent cargo through land routes that extended transit time by 40 to 60 hours per shipment and significantly increased exposure to HIMARS interdiction. Tertiary effects. Institutional shock within Black Sea Fleet Command that produced the zero transit posture in the weeks following. The tertiary effects may have been the most strategically significant. A corridor that had been handling substantial cargo volume per week, resupplying Russian forces along the southern axis. Going dark meant those forces had to absorb a logistics degradation at a moment when they were already operating under HIMARS pressure on their road networks. Ukrainian General Staff noted in its assessment that the timing of the maritime strike complemented ongoing ground-based interdiction operations, creating a compound logistics disruption Russian command had not anticipated. This is combined arms warfare in the 21st century. Not just tank versus tank on a flat steppe. A sea drone in the Azov, a HIMARS on a road junction, a Magura team watching a satellite feed. 3 different weapons, 3 different domains, operating against the same logistics node simultaneously. Real battles, real tactics, real consequences. This is EastAlert. The escort vessel's response time from detecting the northeast drones to opening fire, approximately 4 minutes after the first radar contact, reflects another layer of the ambush's design. 4 minutes sounds fast. It isn't, when you understand that the northeast approach contacts had been deliberately sized and paced to look ambiguous to the radar operator for the first 2 minutes of their approach. The drones were closing at 32 knots rather than their maximum 42, which kept their radar return profile within the wave clutter threshold of the escort's surface search system. The operator had to make multiple passes before the contacts resolved clearly enough to call action stations with confidence. Those 2 minutes of ambiguity cost the escort the engagement. By the time it had made its turn and trained its main gun on a bearing, the northwest drone was already inside effective engagement range, moving fast enough that the gun had to lead its target by more than its fire control system was calibrated to do automatically. The gun crew attempted manual override. They were still computing their solution when the northwest drone hit. This is what the intercept records show. This is what the debris field, mapped by Ukrainian reconnaissance assets in the hours after the engagement, confirmed. And this is what the Russian damage control report, obtained through intelligence channels and partially verified against the MilBlogger accounts, described as a sequence that moved faster than the crew could respond to. The ambush worked not because the drones were faster than the crew. It worked because the geometry meant the crew could never be fast enough, regardless of their training. The trap was built around a decision tree that guaranteed the escort would be in the wrong position when the decisive strike was made. Deliberate, calculated, executed by Ukrainian operators who had trained for exactly this scenario. The tactical lesson of the Sea of Azov ambush is not complicated. Naval escort doctrine developed for surface-to-surface threats against radar-visible conventional vessels is insufficient against low-signature, multi-vector maritime drone attacks. The threshold of drone count at which a conventional escort's fire control capacity is overwhelmed is not high. 5 drones, in this case. 3 attack vectors. 1 geometric trap. Russian Naval Command had the information to understand this threat. The Millblogger accounts make clear the threat had been identified in internal reviews. The corridor kept operating anyway, using the same escort protocols, on the theory that the Azov's shallowness made it less vulnerable than the Black Sea proper. That theory is now at the bottom of the Sea of Azov, along with a landing ship and an escort vessel and 30 to 40 armored vehicles that never reached their destination. And now, the answer to the quiz from earlier in this video. How many Magura V5 drones did Ukraine deploy in the Sea of Azov ambush? The correct answer is B, 5. The original plan called for 6 drones in a symmetrical multi-vector approach. When one drone developed a propulsion fault during its pre-positioned hold period, the planning cell made the decision, in 40 minutes, to execute the strike with 5 drones and a redesigned 3-vector attack geometry. The revised plan was arguably more sophisticated than the original because the staggered approach with 2 holding drones created a second strike capability that exploited exactly the reaction the escort's training predicted it would make. 1 drone fewer, better geometry, same result. Was the decision to turn broadside an unavoidable mistake? Or could the captain have chosen differently? Given the doctrine the crew had been trained on, the turn was almost automatic. But a captain who understood the multi-vector drone ambush threat profile might have kept the ship's bow pointed toward the most dangerous threat axis while ordering maximum speed toward the shallowest available water. Using the Azov's own shallowness as a buffer against below-waterline impacts, it would not have saved the ship. But it might have bought time. Could Russian Naval Command have prevented this engagement? Yes, but not through better crew training or faster gun response times. Prevention required a doctrinal shift that closed the Azov corridor entirely until adequate drone defense systems were deployed on escort vessels, or that routed resupply cargo exclusively through land networks that, while slower and more expensive, did not present the same multi-vector ambush geometry. The decision to keep the corridor open, using the same escort protocols, prioritized logistics tempo over force protection, and it ended with $180 to $220 million on the seafloor. What would you have done differently? If you were commanding the escort, with 30 seconds of radar contact data showing 2 fast-moving surface tracks closing from the northeast? What orders do you give? Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Sea of Azov is quiet now. In 9 meters of water, the landing ship settles into the silt, its bow ramp jammed open, its vehicle deck scattered with the equipment that never reached the southern coast. The escort lies 3 kilometers away, heeled over on its port side, its 76 mm gun still trained on a bearing where targets used to be. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. Stay vigilant.